The ATO's attitude to super. I think that's a real shift.
Mhm.
So we often talk about a shift in the ATO's attitude, a shift in their collection. And one of the things that we're seeing at the moment is a real shift if a company has outstanding super
Yeah.
that they need to pay.
So where there's outstanding super, you can almost guarantee that in terms of all the debts out there that the ATO could collect at any given time, you're going to be higher up the priority chain if all or part of your debt is SGC, whether that's you're a company or you're a director with the director penalty liability for the company's unpaid super, that will generally come up first. And if they're collecting the super, they're going to collect all your debt. So you might actually only have a small amount of super debt, but a large amount of BAS debt. But because you've got some super debt, you might be highly prioritized. So that's always something to keep in mind. And not only that, but you're probably going to mention it shortly, but the law has changed now with Payday Super, and the obligations to report super now rest with employers more quickly because it's with payment cycles. So the obligation to be on top of your super is really important. And if you then miss those obligations, you might be in a position where you need to fix that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're also seeing if you've got super outstanding, exactly like you said, even if the amount of the super outstanding is quite small compared to say the BAS or your GST liabilities is much larger, the time frame in which you can get a payment plan is shorter. But even if you can't pay all your super, it's the same as not being able to pay any ATO debt. Ignoring it makes it so much worse. So you still can get payment plans for the super, and it's I was going to say super important, super. It's still really important to make sure you put the super into a payment plan because the director can be personally liable. And sometimes we even get asked, and I'm sure you've come across this, people say to me, but it's my super, or it's my wife's super, or it's the only super that's outstanding is the director's super. And I'm like, yes, I know. But even if it's just the director's super that's outstanding, we've seen director penalty notices sent to a director for their own super. And that is not an excuse to not pay the super.
No. And I mean, people might rightly assume that the systems on the ATO's end are sophisticated enough to figure that out, but that's not necessarily the case. There'll be an underreporting of an aggregate amount, and then they just see that there's a super balance payable. So that nuance isn't necessarily there in their data, which might be confusing for the person who receives it, but it's a good thing to then figure out because you might be able to plan around that if you know what your options are, if you can arrange a proposal that obviously will then flow back into your own potential superannuation fund. There's some flexibility in how you try to deal with that.
I think planning at the moment, you mentioned the new laws around Payday Super. And so what that's doing for so many businesses is you have to pay the super at the same time you're paying wages. So you might pay wages every fortnight, but your invoices might only get paid for whatever work you do at 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. So I think the big challenge for businesses, especially in the current economy, where there might not be a lot of fat, there might not be a lot of reserve in profit, is to match the money coming in and the money going out, and that you don't have as long to save for that. So planning is just crucial at the moment.
Yeah, there's a conceptual difference in understanding between the ATO and business sometimes. I think businesses typically see revenue as their money until they have to apportion it amongst their expenses, which could be GST or could be employee wages, etc. Whereas the ATO views this as never being a taxpayer's money. It's taxpayers holding it as custodians, basically for employees or the ATO. They're minding it, and it's that almost value system that drives some of these changes and these reforms. Now, you might not necessarily agree with it, but that's how the system is designed. And ultimately, you would have to pay it anyway. So it does mean, as you said, upfront planning, because you're right, the pay cycles that you get on the invoices that you send out generally don't align with your pay cycles. But if you do miss it, the consequences can be high because now with the new Payday Super reforms, if you miss reporting or paying super on payday cycles, they can trigger director penalty events each time you fail to report as well.
Yeah, and if you had a crystal ball, how quickly do you think the ATO, given that they're really and they've publicised that they're in active collection mode, How quickly do you think we're going to start seeing director penalty notices and directors being personally liable for that super to start flowing as a result of missed payday super?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the ATO has publicly said that there would be some upfront transitional relief, or they would invest some
Mm.
resources at the start. But the way that the law was drafted, the obligation for director penalty came in straight away. So like I was saying before, director penalties are automatic. They're also automatic under the Payday Super regime. Now, they might not send director penalty notices up front, but people are still liable if they miss even under this new system. So in, say, 6 months, once that grace period starts to taper off and the ATO starts to issue director penalty notices, they could be for periods that have gone back to pretty much the implementation of Payday Super. We don't know what their approach will be on that for sure, but I expect maybe 6 months in, you would start to see these director penalties come in, if not sooner.